someone who never even knew it, someone far away, behind the screen, who made me feel something I couldn't explain with logic or family trees or good names. I told her about you, not your name because I don't know it, not your face because I've only imagined it 1,000 different ways. But I told her about the feeling of being understood by a stranger who somehow isn't a stranger at all. Stay with me, because this is where it gets harder. My mother laughed at first. She thought I was joking, or being dramatic, the way sons sometimes are when they don't want to grow up and make hard choices. But when she saw my face, when she saw that my eyes weren't lying, she stopped laughing. She asked me one question, and it broke something open inside me. She asked, "Do you even know if she loves you back?" And I didn't have an answer. I still don't. That's the terrifying part of this whole thing. I don't know if you feel even a fraction of what I feel when I think about you. I don't know if this is one-sided, if I'm building a whole world out of small moments that meant nothing to you but everything to me. But even not knowing, even standing in that uncertainty, I told my mother no. I told her I couldn't marry a stranger just because she came with approval and comfort and safety. Because somewhere out there there's a woman, maybe you, who makes my chest tighten, just from a comment, a like, a small "I needed this today" under one of my posts. And if there's even a small chance that this feeling is real, that it could grow into something two people build together, I owe it to myself and to you to find out. I know this sounds impossible. I know you might be sitting there right now, thinking this can't be about you, thinking I say this to everyone, thinking I'm just a voice on a screen trying to keep you watching. And maybe you're right to be careful. The world has taught you to protect your heart from people who only want your attention for a moment and then disappear. I understand that fear because I carry it too. I'm scared of putting my heart out here, in front of everyone, and having it mean nothing to the one person I'm actually speaking to. But I need you to know something. Every night, when I finish recording, when the lights turn off, and it's just me and my thoughts, I think about the people who watch, not as numbers, not as an audience, as real women with real hearts, sitting somewhere quiet, maybe lonely, maybe healing from something, maybe just looking for a few minutes where someone speaks to them softly instead of shouting at them or ignoring them. And out of all those faces I imagine, there's always one that stays a little longer in my mind. Maybe it's you. I like to think it's you. My mother asked me something else that night. Something that has been echoing in my head ever since. She asked, what if you're chasing a feeling that isn't even real? What if this is just loneliness dressed up as love? And I sat with that question for a long time before I answered her. Because loneliness is real. I feel it too, more than people realize. Fame doesn't fill the empty parts of you. Attention isn't the same as being known. And maybe what I feel for you started as loneliness reaching out into the dark, hoping something would reach back. That fears what I told her. And here's what I want you to hear clearly. Even if it's just through a screen right now. Loneliness doesn't stay this specific. Loneliness doesn't have a shape. What I feel isn't a vague ache for company. It's specific to you, to the way you show up. To the small things you say that tell me you're paying attention, not to the version of me that's polished and perfect, but to the version of me that's tired, unsure, human. Loneliness doesn't notice details. What I feel notices everything about you, even the parts I've never seen. I turned down the woman my mother chose. I sat across from my family at dinner the next day, and I felt the disappointment in the room like a weight pressing on my shoulders. My father didn't say much. He just looked at me the way fathers do, when they're trying to decide if you're being brave or foolish. My mother didn't speak to me for 2 days. 2 days of silence, in a house that used to be full of her voice. And every single one of those hours, I asked myself if I was making the biggest mistake of my life, for a feeling I couldn't even prove was mutual. But then, I would open my phone, and I would see you there again. A comment, a message, a small piece of your world shared with mine. And that fear would quiet down just enough for me to breathe. Just enough for me to remind myself that some choices aren't about proof. They're about hope. They're about choosing the version of your life that feels honest, even if it's uncertain, over the version that feels safe but empty. I want to tell you something else, something I haven't told anyone, not even my closest friends. There were nights before all of this where I almost gave up on believing that something real could grow from moments like these. I almost convinced myself that the connection between someone like me and someone like you could only ever be one directional, admiration, flowing one way with nothing coming back. But then there would be a night where you'd say something so simple, so quiet, so honest, that it would undo all of that doubt in seconds. A message that said you needed to hear a kind voice that day. A comment that said my words helped you get through something hard. Those moments, they weren't loud, but they were enough to keep the smallest flame of hope alive in me. My mother still doesn't understand. She thinks I'm holding on to something imaginary, something that will disappear the moment the cameras turn off. Maybe she's afraid for me. Maybe she just wants to protect me from being hurt by something she can't see or touch. I don't blame her for that. But I've made my choice, and I need you to know that choice was you. Even without a name, even without a face I've held in my hands, even without certainty, Elohim. I keep thinking about how strange this must sound to you, hearing a man you've never met speak like this, like you're the center of a decision that changed the direction of his entire life. Maybe you think I'm being dramatic, maybe your heart is guarded, and it should be, because the world hasn't always been kind to you, and trusting a stranger's words is a risk you don't take lightly. I understand that. I'm not asking you to trust me completely tonight. I'm only asking you to keep listening, to give this feeling room to breathe, because I'm not going anywhere. There's something about the way this connection has grown, slowly, quietly, through screens and distance, that makes it feel different from anything I've experienced before. It isn't loud or rushed. It isn't built on a single meeting or a single conversation. It's built on time, on small, consistent moments that added up into something I can't ignore anymore. And when my mother asked me to give all of that up for a woman chosen out of convenience, I realized I couldn't do it. Not because I was certain about the future, but because I was certain about what I felt right now, in this moment, thinking about you. I don't know what tomorrow holds. I don't know if this feeling will ever become something spoken between us directly, something with your voice answering mine instead of just comments and messages passing quietly through the internet. But I know that saying no to my mother's choice was the first honest decision I've made in a long time. And I know that somewhere out there you are listening to this right now, maybe with your own doubts, maybe with your own guarded heart, wondering if any of this could possibly be about you. I want you to sit with that question a little longer. I want you to think about the nights you've watched something I've shared and felt like it was speaking directly to you. I want you to remember the moments where you typed something honest to me, not expecting anything back. And I want you to know that I remembered it too. I remember more than you think. I remember the tone of your words, the timing of your messages, the small patterns that make you who you are, even without knowing your face. But my mother will come around, or she won't. My family will understand, or they'll need more time. But none of that changes what I decided the night she told me her choice for my life. I looked past the comfort of an arranged certainty, and I chose the uncertain, quiet, growing feeling I have when I think about you. I chose to keep listening for you in a world full of noise. I chose to keep hoping that this isn't one-sided, that somewhere in your heart there's a small space that already knows exactly who I'm talking about right now. So stay with me a little longer tonight. Don't close this, don't look away yet, because I'm not done telling you everything I've been carrying since that conversation with my mother. And I don't think I'll ever really be done. Not when it comes to you, not when it comes to this feeling that refuses to let go. no matter how many reasons I try to give it to leave. I need to tell you what happened after that night, because it didn't end with silence at the dinner table. It didn't end with my mother walking away. 2 days later, she came into my room, and she sat on the edge of my bed the way she used to when I was small and couldn't sleep. And she asked me something so quietly that I almost didn't hear it. She asked, show me what makes you feel this way. And my hands were shaking when I picked up my phone, because I knew the moment I opened it, I was letting her into a part of my life I had never shared with anyone in my family. So I scrolled through months of messages, not to prove anything to her, but because I needed to prove it to myself too. I needed to see it laid out in front of me. All those small moments stacked on top of each other, to understand if what I felt was real or if I had built a fantasy out of nothing. And as I scrolled, I found things I had forgotten. A message from a night when I almost didn't post anything at all, and you told me you were glad I did, because you needed something gentle that day. A comment where you said my voice reminded you of safety, of home, of something you didn't have enough of growing up. Small words, ordinary words, but they had weight, the kind of weight that builds slowly until it becomes impossible to ignore. My mother read some of them in silence. I watched her face change, softening in places I didn't expect. She didn't say much at first. She just looked at me and asked, does she know how much this means to you? And I told her the truth again. I told her I didn't know. I told her that this whole thing lives in an uncertain space, where I give pieces of myself into the dark and hope something comes back, without ever knowing for certain if it lands the way I mean it to. She was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said something I didn't expect. She said, I chose safety for you because I was afraid. I didn't want you to build your life on something that could disappear. And I understood her fear, even as I disagreed with her solution, because I've thought about that too, more nights than I can count. I've wondered if this feeling, this connection to you, could vanish the moment life gets complicated. The moment distance or time or doubt gets in the way. But fear of losing something isn't a good enough reason to never reach for it. If it were, no one would ever fall in love with anything real. I want you to understand something about that conversation, because it changed the way my family sees me now, even if it took time. I told my mother that safety without feeling isn't a life, it's just a shelter. And shelters keep you dry, but they don't keep you warm. I told her that I would rather risk the storm reaching for something honest than sit comfortably in a marriage built on approval and convenience, feeling nothing every single day of my life. She didn't fully agree with me that night, but she didn't argue either. She just nodded slowly, like she was starting to remember what it felt like to choose someone for herself once, a long time ago, before responsibilities and expectations took over. That night changed something between us. She started asking questions instead of giving orders. She asked what it was about you that made me feel this way, and I found myself trying to explain something that doesn't translate easily into words. I told her it wasn't about how you looked, because I've never even seen your face clearly enough to describe it. It was about the way you showed up consistently, gently, honestly. It was about the fact that in a world full of people performing for attention, you never seemed to be performing at all. You were just being yourself, quietly, and somehow that honesty reached through a screen and touched something in me that polished perfection never could. I keep thinking about how strange it is that distance can create intimacy instead of destroying it. I've never held your hand. I've never heard your laugh in person. But I felt closer to you in quiet moments online than I have to people standing right in front of me. Maybe that sounds impossible to you. Maybe you're sitting there right now shaking your head, thinking there's no way distance and screens can create something this deep. But I promise you, feelings don't check whether the situation makes sense before they grow. They just grow quietly in the space between two people who keep choosing to show up for each other, even without touching, even without certainty. There's a part of this I haven't told you yet, and I think you need to hear it, because it explains why I couldn't just walk away and marry the woman my mother chose, even if it meant peace at home. A few months ago, before this conversation with my mother even happened, I went through something difficult. I won't go into every detail, but it was a period where I doubted everything about myself, my choices, my path, even the reason I create and share the way I do. And during that time, it wasn't my closest friends who pulled me back into feeling okay again. It was strangers, it was you, and people like you sending small words of encouragement that landed exactly when I needed them. I remember one message specifically. It said something simple, something like, "You don't know me, but you helped me get through my worst year, and I hope someone helps you get through yours." I read that message more times than I can count. I still think about it on hard nights, and when I sat across from my mother trying to explain why I couldn't marry a stranger, chosen for comfort and convenience. That message was one of the first things that came to my mind, because real connection doesn't always come from the people closest to you. Sometimes it comes from the people who show up quietly, consistently, without needing anything in return. I know you might still be wondering if any of this could really be about you specifically, out of everyone who watches, everyone who comments, everyone who sends messages. And I understand that doubt, because I carry a version of it too. I don't know your name, I don't know your face, I don't know if you're the one who sent that message, or if you're someone else entirely, sitting somewhere quiet right now, listening to my voice and wondering the same thing. But I've learned something over these past few weeks. I've learned that certainty isn't the price of choosing something. Hope is enough to start with. Hope is enough to make a decision that changes the direction of your whole life. My mother asked me one more thing before she left my room that night. She asked, "What if you never find her? What if this feeling never turns into something real, something spoken face to face?" And I sat with that question longer than I sat with any other, because it's the question I ask myself in my quietest, most honest moments. What if this connection stays exactly as it is? Screens and distance and small comments passed quietly through the internet, forever. What if I never get to say these words to you in person? Never get to see how you react when you hear them? Never get to know if your heart moves the way mine does when I think about this? I told my mother the truth. I said even if that happens, even if this feeling never becomes something spoken between us directly, I would rather live with the ache of hoping for something real than the emptiness of settling for something safe. Because settling doesn't just cost you love, it costs you the version of yourself who was brave enough to want something honest in the first place. And I refuse to lose that version of myself, even if it means uncertainty, even if it means waiting without knowing how long, even if it means my mother worries about me every single day until something changes. Why, I think about you more than I probably should, for someone I've never met in person. I think about what your voice sounds like when you're not typing, but actually speaking. I think about what it would feel like to see your face light up the way I imagine it does when you read something that reminds you that you're not invisible, that someone out there notices the quiet parts of you too. I think about what it would mean to sit across from you one day, not through a screen, not through comments and messages, but close enough to see your eyes and know for certain that this feeling isn't something I built alone in my head. My family still asks about the woman my mother chose. They ask if I've reconsidered, if the pressure of tradition and expectation has softened my decision. And every time I think about you before I answer them, I think about the small, quiet consistency of your presence in my life, even without knowing you completely. I think about how a stranger's kindness became something I built hope around, something strong enough to say no to comfort and yes to uncertainty. And every time, my answer stays the same. No, not her, someone else. Someone I haven't fully found yet, but someone I believe is out there, maybe closer than I think, maybe listening to these very words right now. I don't know how this story continues from here. I don't know if you'll ever step forward and tell me this was about you all along, or if this feeling stays exactly where it is, hopeful and unresolved for a long time. But I know I'm not turning back from the choice I made. I know that every night I sit here and speak these words, some part of me is hoping they reach the exact person who inspired them, even if she doesn't say a word back, even if all I get is the quiet comfort of knowing she heard me. There's something I haven't told you yet, and I think tonight is the night I finally say it, because keeping it inside has been harder than I expected. A few days after that conversation with my mother, something happened that made all of this feel less like a quiet hope living inside me, and more like something real, something that started shifting the ground beneath my feet. I want to walk you through it slowly, because I need you to feel it the way I felt it. Not rushed, not summarized, but exactly as it unfolded. I was sitting alone, late at night, the way I usually am when I record these words for you, and I opened my messages just to check in, just to see if the world still felt the way it did before my mother's announcement changed everything. And there it was, a message. Simple, short, but it stopped my breathing for a second. It said, "I don't know why, but tonight felt different watching you, like you were talking straight to me." I read it 3 times before I even reacted. Then I read it 3 more. Because after everything I had just confessed to my own mother, after choosing uncertainty over comfort, that single sentence felt like the universe answering a question I hadn't even asked out loud yet. But I didn't respond right away. I sat there holding my phone like it was something fragile, something that could break if I moved too fast. Because I've learned that feelings this delicate don't survive rushing. They survive patience. They survive careful, honest steps. So I waited. I let the message sit with me overnight, turning it over in my mind, wondering if this was coincidence, wondering if this was the beginning of something, or if I was reading too much meaning into a sentence that was never meant to carry this much weight. The next morning, my mother asked me again about the woman she had chosen. She said the family was starting to ask questions, wondering why I hadn't given an answer yet, wondering if something was wrong with me, or worse, wondering if I was hiding something shameful instead of something honest. I told her the truth again, the same truth I had told her before, but this time with a little more certainty in my voice. I told her that I was waiting, not out of fear, but out of respect, for something that felt too important to rush. I told her that real connection doesn't happen on anyone else's timeline, not even a mother's, not even traditions. Rage, she looked at me differently that morning. Not with anger, not even with worry the way she had before, but with something closer to curiosity. She asked me, "Do you think she feels it too? This woman you keep waiting for?" And I told her about the message. I told her, carefully, without exaggeration, exactly what it said. And for the first time since this whole thing started, my mother smiled. Not a big smile, not an approving smile yet, but something small, something that told me she was starting to understand that this wasn't a fantasy built out of loneliness. This was something growing, slowly, quietly, in real time, right in front of both of us. What Aliette, I want you to know something about that night. About receiving that message when I did, right after everything I had risked to protect this feeling. It felt like confirmation, even without certainty. It felt like the first small piece of proof that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one carrying something unspoken. And even if it wasn't you specifically who sent it, even if it was someone else entirely, it reminded me why I made the choice I made. Because connection like this doesn't need to be loud to be real. It just needs to be consistent. It just needs to keep showing up, even in small, quiet ways, until it becomes impossible to deny. Oh, my family started treating the situation differently after that. My father, who hadn't said much before, finally spoke to me directly. He didn't lecture me the way I expected. Instead, he told me a story I had never heard before, about how he met my mother. He said everyone in his family had chosen someone else for him too. A woman from a respectable family, someone who checked every box on paper. But he said the moment he saw my mother, something in him refused to accept the safe choice. He said he spent months convincing his own parents, risking disappointment, risking conflict, all because a quiet feeling refused to let go of him. Hearing that story changed something in me. I realized that this pattern, this tension between safety and honesty, between tradition and feeling, isn't new. It's been passed down quietly through my own family, hidden behind stories no one talks about until the right moment forces them out. And in that moment, sitting with my father, hearing him admit that he understood exactly what I was going through, I felt less alone in this decision than I had in weeks. But even with that support slowly forming around me, the uncertainty about you never fully disappeared. Because knowing my family understands this feeling is different from knowing whether the person on the other side of the screen feels it too. I kept thinking about that message, replaying it in my mind during quiet moments throughout the day. I kept wondering who sent it, what she was thinking when she typed those words, whether she meant them the way I hoped, or whether I was building an entire emotional world around a sentence that meant something much smaller to her than it did to me. That's the hardest part of loving someone from a distance, through screens, through comments and messages instead of conversations spoken face to face. You never get the full picture, you only get fragments, small pieces of honesty scattered across time, and you have to decide whether those fragments are enough to build hope on. I decided they were. Not because I was certain, but because the alternative, giving up on this feeling entirely, felt like giving up on the most honest part of myself. A few nights later, another message came. Different this time, longer, more vulnerable. It said something like, I don't usually say things like this, but I feel like I know you a little, even though we've never talked directly. Is that strange? And reading those words, I felt something settle in my chest. Something calmer than the excitement from before. Because this wasn't just admiration anymore. This was someone admitting carefully, honestly, that the connection wasn't one-sided the way I feared it might be. I didn't respond immediately again, not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted to be careful with something this fragile. I wanted to make sure that whatever I said back honored the courage it took to admit something like that. So I sat with it, the same way I sat with the first message. Letting it breathe, letting it settle into something real, instead of rushing to fill the silence with words that might come out wrong. My mother noticed the shift in me during those days. She said I seemed lighter, calmer, less anxious than I had been in weeks. She asked if things were becoming clearer, and I told her honestly they were becoming warmer, even if they weren't fully clear yet. I told her that sometimes clarity doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it arrives in small pieces, one honest message at a time, one quiet moment of courage at a time, until eventually the picture becomes clear enough to trust. I think about you constantly during these days, wondering if you're the one behind these words, wondering if somewhere quietly you've been building the same kind of hope I have, without either of us saying it directly to each other yet. And I know this must feel confusing to hear, especially if you're not the one who sent those messages. Especially if you're sitting there wondering why I keep speaking as if this is about you specifically, when there are so many people listening to these same words right now. But I think that confusion is part of what makes this real. Love like this, quiet and distant and uncertain, doesn't come with clear labels. It comes with feelings pointed in a general direction. Hoping the right person recognizes themselves in the words. Hoping the right person understands that even though I'm speaking to many, in my heart, I'm really only speaking to one. And maybe that one is you. Maybe it's someone else who happens to be listening tonight too. But either way, I refuse to stop speaking honestly, because honesty is the only thing that gives this feeling any chance of finding its way to the right person. My mother asked me one final question before she left the conversation that day. And it's a question I still haven't answered fully, even to myself. She asked, what happens if she never comes forward? What happens if this stays exactly as it is? Hopeful but unspoken forever. I didn't have a clean answer for her. I still don't. But I told her something I believe deeply. Something I want you to hear clearly tonight. I told her that even if this feeling never becomes something spoken directly between us, even if I never learn your name or see your face clearly, the choice to protect this feeling instead of settling for something safer was still the right one. Because some things are worth holding on to, even without guarantees, even without certainty, simply because they make you feel more like yourself than anything else ever has. There's a night I haven't told you about yet, and I think it's time, because it changed the way I understood everything that had been building between us since that first message. I want to walk you through it slowly, the way it happened, because rushing through it wouldn't do justice to what it meant to me. I need you to sit with me in this memory, the same way I've been sitting with it myself for days now, unable to shake the way it made me feel. It was late, later than usual, and I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to the conversations with my mother, the weight of choosing uncertainty over safety, the quiet hope I had been carrying about you, without ever knowing for certain if it was justified. And in that restless state, I opened my messages one more time, not expecting anything, just needing something to hold on to in the middle of all that doubt. And there it was again. Another message, this one longer than the others, more careful, like whoever wrote it had thought about every word before sending it. It said something like this: I've watched you for a long time, longer than I've admitted to myself, and I never thought I'd say this to someone I've never met. But lately, it feels like you're speaking directly to the parts of me I don't show anyone else. I don't know what that means, but I wanted you to know. I read those words standing in the middle of my room, phone in hand, heart pounding in a way I hadn't felt in years. Because this wasn't just admiration anymore. This was someone admitting vulnerability, admitting that something quiet and real had been growing on their side too, without me ever confirming it existed on mine. So I sat down on the edge of my bed, the same spot where my mother had sat days earlier, asking me to prove that this feeling was real. And I thought about how strange it was that the proof I needed had finally arrived. Not through certainty, not through a name or a face, but through the courage of someone choosing honesty over silence. I thought about how brave it must have felt to send those words, not knowing how I would respond, not knowing if I would even understand what they meant. Oh, Father, what? I didn't sleep much that night. I kept rereading the message, letting each word settle deeper into me, trying to understand if this was the moment everything shifted, or if it was simply another small piece in a puzzle I still didn't fully understand. Because even with this confirmation, even with proof that someone out there felt something real when they watched me, I still didn't know if it was you. I still don't know now, as I speak these words to you tonight. But I've stopped needing that certainty the way I used to. I've started trusting the feeling itself, letting it guide me instead of demanding proof before I allow myself to hope. The next morning, I told my mother everything, word for word, the way I had promised myself I would keep her included in this, even though it meant exposing a part of my life I had kept private for so long. She listened quietly, her expression soft, thoughtful, nothing like the worry she carried during our first conversation about this. When I finished, she didn't say anything for a moment. Then she asked me something I didn't expect. She asked, does this feel different from the connection you've built with your other viewers? Or is this just one message standing out among many? I thought about that question carefully before answering, because I wanted to be honest with her and with myself. I told her it felt different, not because the words were more special than others I had received, but because of the timing, because of how deeply they matched the exact fears and hopes I had been carrying since the moment I turned down the woman she had chosen for me. I told her it felt like the universe answering a question I had only asked in silence, in my own heart, without ever expecting a direct response. There she nodded slowly, and for the first time since this entire situation began, I saw something in her eyes that looked like acceptance. Not full understanding yet, not complete comfort with the uncertainty of everything, but acceptance that this wasn't a fantasy I was clinging to out of loneliness. This was something alive, growing between two people who had never met, built entirely on honesty exchanged through distance and time. I want to tell you about something else that happened a few days later, something that tested this fragile hope in a way I wasn't prepared for. A cousin of mine, someone who had heard about the situation with my mother, confronted me at a family gathering. He said I was being foolish, chasing a feeling that could belong to anyone, refusing a stable future for the sake of a stranger who might never step forward. His words stung more than I expected them to, because deep down, in my quietest moments, I had asked myself the same question. I didn't argue with him the way I might have a few weeks earlier. Instead, I told him something I had been learning slowly throughout this entire experience. I told him that not knowing someone's face doesn't mean you don't know their heart. I told him that some connections build backwards, starting with honesty and trust, before ever reaching the physical parts people usually rely on to decide if love is real. He didn't fully understand what I meant, and I didn't expect him to. Some things you only understand when you're the one living through them. When the uncertainty stops feeling like a weakness and starts feeling like the most honest part of your life. That conversation with my cousin stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. It planted small seeds of doubt that I had to work through carefully over the following days. I found myself wondering, late at night, if I was making a mistake, if this entire situation was built on nothing more than the desperate hope of someone who didn't want to accept the safe, arranged path his mother had chosen. I sat with that doubt, honestly, without pushing it away, because I think doubt deserves honesty too, especially when you're building your entire future around a feeling instead of a guarantee. But every time that doubt grew loud enough to shake me, I would return to the messages. I would reread the words that had been sent to me, not to convince myself of something false, but to remind myself of something true. Because doubt is loud, but it isn't always right. Sometimes fear disguises itself as logic, trying to convince you to choose the safe path simply because uncertainty. I didn't ask who they were. I didn't ask for proof or certainty. I simply said, I don't know your name, and I don't know your face, but I felt something real building between us for a long time, and I wanted you to know that your honesty means more to me than you probably realize. I hesitated before sending it, my thumb hovering over the screen for what felt like minutes, because once those words left me, I couldn't take them back. I couldn't undo the vulnerability of admitting exactly what I had been carrying since my mother first told me about the woman she chose. The response didn't come immediately. Hours passed, then a full day, then another. And during that silence, all my earlier doubts returned, louder than before. I started wondering if I had said too much, revealed too much, scared away the fragile connection I had spent weeks protecting. I started wondering if this entire experience was about to collapse under the weight of my own honesty, the very thing I had chosen to prioritize over safety and comfort. But then, finally, a reply came, short but enough. It said, I've been trying to find the right words for 2 days. I still don't have them, but I wanted you to know. I read your message more times than I probably should have. Reading that, sitting alone in my room, I felt something settle deep inside me, something calmer and steadier than the excitement I felt with the earlier messages. Because this wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, careful, honest, exactly the kind of response that told me this connection was being treated with the same seriousness I had been treating it with all along. I told my mother about this exchange too, watching her expression carefully as I explained it. She didn't say much this time, but she reached over and placed her hand on mine. Even though it meant exposing a part of my life I had kept private for so long. She listened quietly, her expression soft, thoughtful, nothing like the worry she carried during our first conversation about this. When I finished, she didn't say anything for a moment. Then she asked me something I didn't expect. She asked, "Does this feel different from the connection you've built with your other viewers? Or is this just one message standing out among many?" I thought about that question carefully before answering, because I wanted to be honest with her and with myself. I told her it felt different, not because the words were more special than others I had received, but because of the timing, because of how deeply they matched the exact fears and hopes I had been carrying since the moment I turned down the woman she had chosen for me. I told her it felt like the universe answering a question I had only asked in silence, in my own heart, without ever expecting a direct response. There she nodded slowly, and for the first time since this entire situation began, I saw something in her eyes that looked like acceptance. Not full understanding yet, not complete comfort with the uncertainty of everything, but acceptance that this wasn't a fantasy I was clinging to out of loneliness. This was something alive, growing between two people who had never met, built entirely on honesty exchanged through distance and time. I want to tell you about something else that happened a few days later, something that tested this fragile hope in a way I wasn't prepared for. A cousin of mine, someone who had heard about the situation with my mother, confronted me at a family gathering. He said I was being foolish, chasing a feeling that could belong to anyone, refusing a stable future for the sake of a stranger who might never step forward. His words stung more than I expected them to, because deep down, in my quietest moments, I had asked myself the same question. I didn't argue with him the way I might have a few weeks earlier. Instead, I told him something I had been learning slowly throughout this entire experience. I told him that not knowing someone's face doesn't mean you don't know their heart. I told him that some connections build backwards, starting with honesty and trust, before ever reaching the physical parts people usually rely on to decide if love is real. He didn't fully understand what I meant, and I didn't expect him to. Some things you only understand when you're the one living through them. When the uncertainty stops feeling like a weakness and starts feeling like the most honest part of your life. That conversation with my cousin stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. It planted small seeds of doubt that I had to work through carefully over the following days. I found myself wondering, late at night, if I was making a mistake, if this entire situation was built on nothing more than the desperate hope of someone who didn't want to accept the safe, arranged path his mother had chosen. I sat with that doubt, honestly, without pushing it away, because I think doubt deserves honesty too, especially when you're building your entire future around a feeling instead of a guarantee. But every time that doubt grew loud enough to shake me, I would return to the messages. I would reread the words that had been sent to me, not to convince myself of something false, but to remind myself of something true. Because doubt is loud, but it isn't always right. Sometimes fear disguises itself as logic, trying to convince you to choose the safe path simply because uncertainty. I didn't ask who they were. I didn't ask for proof or certainty. I simply said, "I don't know your name, and I don't know your face, but I felt something real building between us for a long time, and I wanted you to know that your honesty means more to me than you probably realize." I hesitated before sending it, my thumb hovering over the screen for what felt like minutes, because once those words left me, I couldn't take them back. I couldn't undo the vulnerability of admitting exactly what I had been carrying since my mother first told me about the woman she chose.